Unlock Season 14 with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of film, a dimension of scares, a dimension of discussion. You're moving into a land of both humor and substance, of facts and intros. You've just crossed over into the Horrific Podcast. So we're back with another of these episodes where we are examining episodes of the Twilight Zone and talking about maybe things we see there that we've seen used as inspiration for horror movies, or maybe things that were done well that have been copied in successful horror movies or whatever. Mostly this is an excuse to go back and watch episodes of the Twilight Zone and then talk about them together through the lens of horror movie making. And it's been a fun ride so far.
Yeah. It's strange to only have like a 20-minute episode to watch in preparation for our week, which I just think kind of funny because it's like, oh, we could technically do like 6 of these episodes in like a standard movie.
Yeah. And I typically, when I'm watching a movie, because there's almost always slow parts because almost every movie is too long, I'll go do some reading about like the actors or the movie itself or whatever along the way when it's slow. Yeah. And I don't have time to do that. So what I found is like I'll finish one of these episodes and then I'll like pause the player and then I'll look up and it's like 30 minutes later and I've just been like reading about it and writing notes for the episode and stuff. And it's like somehow I'm spending more time writing and thinking about the episode than I spent watching the episode, which is, kind of different from how typically it works with the movies. So
that's a good point.
But it's good because these episodes are very rich. Like there's a lot there to kind of dig through. And then I feel like the echoing legacy of the Twilight Zone is just really impossible to understate and impossible to overstate. Yeah, that's the one I wanted. Yeah. Anyway, a thing that has come up so far that we've talked about is how there are some movies that are very, very obviously based on Twilight Zone episodes. And I think that sometimes those movies really call it out and embrace it. And whoever, wrote the script or directed the movie or whatever says, yeah, this is absolutely based on that. That's one of my favorite episodes. And here are things that I liked about it. And this is where I got the creative ideas for the stuff I'm going to do on top of that foundation to make something new and exciting. And those are what I like to call good people who are respectable and good at their jobs. Some people are just like, what's the Twilight Zone? Wink.
Yep.
And this week, I think we kind of got ourselves one of those.
Yeah, we did. 100%.
It's just so funny to me how, I don't know, people are weird about things. And one of them is, the source of like creativity. And so I'm going to do a quick recap of this episode. And then I think you've got some kind of fun facts or maybe some background on what this episode did or didn't inspire in a very prominent horror movie. And then we'll kind of get into the details of it. This week we watched the episode Little Girl Lost. It was season 3, episode 26 from 1962. This episode starts with 2 parents who are woken up at night by the sound of their daughter crying. They go to check on her and she has mysteriously vanished, but they can still hear her. Eventually the dog runs under her bed and also disappears. They invite over a physicist friend, because that's who you call, to help them investigate and find a portal to another dimension in the wall. They don't have much luck calling out to the daughter, so the dad goes in and everything gets crazy. Finally, he's able to call the dog to lead the daughter back to him, and they get out together just in time. So, I want to call out that a lot of the information we got for this next part came from a Poltergeist fan site, but it did have links to a lot of other sites that kind of gave like backup for the interviews and stuff. So we're not making this up, and it is somewhat verified. But if you read much about the movie Poltergeist, a lot of what you find is going to be focused on some controversy around the directing and Tobe Hooper versus Steven Spielberg and who did what and who got credit for it. the people who made this movie and were involved with writing it and everything else, at least as far as I can find, never even mentioned Little Girl Lost or the guy who wrote the script for it, which was Richard Matheson, as being either an influence or an inspiration. But if you do a little more digging, it gets real hard to deny that that's exactly where this came from.
Right. Yeah. And after a little bit of digging, we found out that Michael Grayus, one of the authors of the script for the Poltergeist, he said that originally they wanted to kill off Carol Ann, but Spielberg thought it was too dark. Grayus said, "We didn't kill her, obviously. And this solution to killing her, the solution to killing her was having her disappear into another dimension." Came out in a conversation with Spielberg. According to the Poltergeist fan site, it's unclear whether the Spielberg suggested change to her getting kidnapped was really added by Chris and Victor in one of the later drafts, or added by Spielberg personally when he rewrote their drafts himself. Quote, more likely. This plot device idea would raise suspicion that Spielberg had been really heavily influenced by Richard Matheson's short story and later Twilight Zone episode, Little Girl Lost. In fact, in a 1982 interview with Twilight Zone magazine, Matheson stated that Spielberg had once shown an interest in adapting that story as a film. It would later be rumored, but not confirmed, that Matheson was hired to write the Twilight Zone movie and given a percentage of that film's box office, partly in efforts to head off any potential suit over Poltergeist. So in a 2011 interview with AICN, Matheson said, "Well, Poltergeist was inspired by one of mine, and I never got credit for it. I had one of those old videos of the Twilight Zone episode, Little Girl Lost, of the little girl that goes into the fourth dimension through the wall of her bedroom. They sort of used the idea and made their own concept of it," is the quote. So Matheson, who's the author, is like, yeah, 100%. Spielberg, who who borrowed the idea heavily, is like, "Twilight Zone? Never heard of it. What is that? I don't know what you're talking about."
He's like, this was all from my brain.
Yeah.
I made this.
Yeah. I wrote the Twilight Zone, actually.
Yeah.
It's me.
But it was just kind of funny to me, the idea that there is speculation that he only got the job writing for the Twilight Zone movie just to like smooth things over so he wouldn't sue him over Poltergeist.
I guarantee it, man. You know.
That was super funny to me. But
yeah. And here's the thing with this episode, like, Poltergeist isn't the only one. I think it's like probably one of the, I don't want to say more popular, but like there's an obvious connection, but like going into different dimensions and stuff has happened since. I'm like thinking of like Insidious. It's kind of similar in a way that different dimension thing go through the wall, but still, like, I think my point with it is just like, I don't have a problem, just like admit it though. And I'm sure there are legal reasons why they don't want to. It's all around money, I assume, but still.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things we talked about before too was the idea that it's okay to cite your sources. I mean, like, there's obviously a bunch of stuff in Poltergeist that was really interesting and creative and well done that was built on top of any idea from this episode. I mean, that's a good point. A 20-minute TV episode that was pretty self-contained and then had a happy ending and was just done. Whereas Poltergeist, I think, created a much more rich environment for the story to take place in and had a lot more twists and turns. And I don't know. I would say, like, that idea, or the thing that I took from this was the idea of losing a child or a child disappearing, and like how creepy that would be, and how you would do anything to find out what happened and get them back. And that's this really like deeply terrifying feeling that I thought I could tap into for a movie. I just don't get why people won't cite their sources. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's weird to me.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, all that said, if you are a fan of Poltergeist, you will probably really enjoy this episode.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Maybe, I don't know. But I mean, the main thing is like, if your problem with the reason why you're not citing the source is because you don't want to have to pay them, then you're obviously stole from, like, that's the
Well,
wrong
yeah.
piece as well. You know, like, that's the frustratingly wrong piece, because it's like, you just need to just acknowledge it. But sorry, I had okay, it's time I tell you guys. I wrote a script about Oppenheimer. Next thing I know,
I wrote a Twilight Zone episode about Barbie. You remember the doll?
yeah, yeah.
No one's
Don't
ever
know how
ripped
that
that
ties
off,
into
though.
what we're talking about here, Daniel.
Exactly.
Stay on the same page, please. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So, anyway, all that aside, what did you think of this episode?
I'm like the worst person, man, to ask about this, because this is my home. You know, I actually, out of what we watched so far, this has probably been the least favorite of it. Not that because I don't like it. It's just I like the other two a little bit, but I don't know. Like, I felt like this was, how do I want to put it? This was like almost, we've talked about this style with horror movies where it's like you can't have a ton of casts. Like, you don't need a ton of people to make a good film. And I think that's kind of the example with this episode too, because there's like 4 actors in this.
Yeah.
The mom, dad, daughter, and friend.
Bill, the physicist.
The physicist, yeah. But anyway, so it's like, this is kind of a prime example. Yeah, I mean, I definitely didn't have any beef. The problem also is, after you watch Twilight Zone so much over the years, you just remember it. Like, as soon as it starts,
Yeah.
like, I didn't remember it until I started, and I'm like, oh yeah, I know.
This one.
Yeah, I know where we're at here. Yeah, I didn't think it was too bad. It definitely like gave me the same vibe as like the as I'm gonna say Poltergeist, not because they copied the idea potentially, but just like that campy kind of feeling in a way, if that makes sense. Like almost like a haunted house feeling, not sure what's going on, but in between action of the ghost throwing something, or, you know what I mean? So it's just, it did have that kind of home campy feeling, which I enjoyed, if that makes sense.
Yeah. For me, it was like, it started strong and then it lulled and then it ended strong. So the fact that you were kind of right in the action in the beginning, like, they didn't spend a bunch of time setting up the characters or anything.
No,
it like
didn't.
starts with them like waking up and a child is missing. You know, like, that's intense, and that getting right to it like that really sets the tone for the whole rest of the episode. But then I felt like, to get from that point to the point where something interesting was happening took a while. And when things take a while, I tend to notice stuff that I think is goofy a lot more. And so just the idea that like the reaction is like, oh, my child's missing, I'm gonna go to the phone, who should I call? And I might think like the police or medical, firefighters.
Okay,
I mean, just any number of qualified organizations that might be able to dispatch help, but they're like, no, we need a physicist.
I mean, you're my first person I call when I'm in problems. So
you think maybe it wasn't exclusively his physicism?
I mean,
that was the selection criteria?
Listen, they didn't get into, you just announced they didn't get into the meat of this. We don't know. The dad could have had felonies.
I guess that's a good point. That is true. He might know better than to call the cops. That makes total sense to me.
And his daughter should too, if he raised her right. But Uh, no, that's one of like, maybe we should have like a section of like, this is the piece that helps the plot move forward a little bit.
Yes,
You know what I
absolutely.
mean?
And that's
Yeah,
what I was getting at with it. Is like I feel like there was a lot of stuff to get us from point A to point B,
yeah.
which was parents realize the girl is gone, and then point B is parents realize there's this dimension, this portal into another dimension in the bedroom, and they've got to figure out how to get her back. The in between time there, we can probably just not talk a lot about because it was just a little bit goofy and very contrived for moving the story forward.
Yeah.
But what I think was the most interesting scene in the whole episode was when you first see the dad's arm from the other dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything up until that point had just been like inside this house with them trying to figure out what was going on. And it felt very like well known. Like everything was very explainable,
Mm-hmm.
except that the daughter was missing. And then all of a sudden, you see his arm reach out and you see it from the perspective of the other dimension. And the way that they were doing the filming with all the like smoke, and it seemed like obviously they were rotating the camera around, but they were doing a lot of filming of like reflections on like glass bowls or something that had like a curve to them
Mm-hmm.
that just made it all seem super weird and completely unexplainable. And then when he falls through, it just gets like that much worse. And then with the audio and everything, like we've talked about with previous Twilight Zone episodes, it was very low budget, but I felt like they were very, very effective with what they chose to do and how they chose to use the technology that they had access to.
Yeah, and I think that this episode was almost like a puzzle where like it definitely had to have certain pieces to it. Because for me, like I think when the dog went in, like shortly after, the dad lets the dog in, and the dog's just like, screw y'all, I'm out, and just like went in. That was like the piece where it's like, okay, that like where I'm saying with the puzzle is like, okay, that tells the people in the episode that that's where the daughter is 100%. So there shouldn't be that much more questioning other than like, why is this a thing? But like maybe she went to the neighbors, or maybe, like those kind of questions are out. So that's the puzzle piece that fits, because it's like, okay, well, we just saw the dog go in. You kind of see the girl go in. They didn't, but they saw the dog jump in, or I guess the mom did. But and then barking, you could hear it. But that was kind of the turning page. And I think you almost have to have this. I also wondered if the reason why they had a character as a physicist so that they could explain different dimensions just based off the fact that people in the 1960s were just dumb. That's just what I assume when watching this.
Well, I think it would probably be fair to assume that not everyone in the audience would be familiar with that. I mean, I don't think everyone would be today if it weren't in Marvel,
Right.
But,
that's basically my trying to be funny way of saying that. That's why you would have a physicist on there. But also, I was a little frustrated that they didn't just tie a rope around the dad's waist and like have him go in, and then like pull him. That would be my method.
Yeah. That was kind of the obvious win there, but you never know. Maybe he wasn't allowed to own rope because he's a felon.
That's a good point.
So I thought the scene where he was bringing the girl back was good. Like that was a good conclusion to the whole thing, because he's like getting the dog to bring the girl to him, and then they come back through, and the camera's kind of spinning, and the audio and visuals are all trippy, and then they make it back through, and it really feels like they've achieved something, and then that hole just seals up behind them. And so that realization that they were seconds away from being trapped there forever but just didn't know it, I thought was like a really creepy twist on the ending. Because I can get why they wanted to do like the Hollywood ending of like, oh yeah, we got the girl back, because this isn't an exclusively like horror show. But I like that they had the weird thing, that kind of like haunting realization at the end of, we could well have been stuck there forever, and it was really, really close that we even made it out.
Yeah, or dead. Like he almost died.
Well, yeah, it could have been
Yeah,
chopped up.
that's dark, man.
So yeah, thanks, Twilight Zone.
Yeah, now I got
I'm glad
problems.
we're doing this, lighten the mood after that miniseries
Yeah,
on cults. But
yeah.
yeah,
I would rather watch this, 1,000 times than Poltergeist, personally.
I wonder what the ratio. You could probably watch this 3, 4, 5,
Probably.
as many as 5 times per one watch of Poltergeist. So
Yeah, yeah.
ROI.
It was this one was different because it was, I think, like the concept of change that can happen, like randomly and immediately, that could like greatly affect your life. I would assume is kind of like the moral of the story in a way. Maybe, I don't know, but I guess that would kind of be. I mean, the dimension thing is scary in itself. Don't get me wrong, but when you don't explain like how it got there, because it's not a movie, it's just an episode. Uh, I think that would be kind of the horror aspect of it for me. Did you have any horror aspects of this episode?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of the same thing that Poltergeist was built around. Was that just that fear of like losing a child
Yeah,
as a starting point, and then when you enter in, not only has that happened, but it's something that is from like this realm that I can't even see or interact with. I think like metaphorically is, what are the other things in life that could happen that would keep you, from your child or
yeah,
from a loved one or whatever else. I think that it really is like the very much the psychological aspect that it's getting into. And then there was a little bit of, kind of oh crap, where am I and what is this place and how do I get out of here? Escape feeling at the end, what I thought was done effectively.
You ever seen the movie Beetlejuice?
I might have heard of it.
It also reminded me of a scene in Beetlejuice where they have to draw a door on the wall and then then have to knock on it, but that goes into the like afterlife kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of films borrow the more. I know we're only on the third week, but like it's like the more you think about it, it's like, yeah, this is like, because they drew on the wall in this episode, they drew a square where the dimension was in chalk.
Yeah.
Well, that was the same thing that happened in Beetlejuice, basically. So just kind of, I like it. Like, I like the fact that it has influenced it, as long as you admit that it influenced your thing.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's all I got for this episode.
Look, either you mention what influenced you or you offer the author of the thing that influenced you a writing job on a future movie so that he doesn't sue you. Right. Okay? Those are the two options.
There's no in between. There's no other dimension here. You just entered the Twilight Zone.
Remember that, Greta Gerwig. And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com or hit us up on the IG. That's what the kids call Instagram. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.